Now, if you're planning to go on holiday this summer, to what extent will the environmental impact of going away affect where you go and how you get there? According to Booking.com, 7 out of 10 travellers say they'd be more likely to book somewhere that considered sustainability. And we had loads of feedback to a story we ran about the travel industry reporting an incredible start to the year. We reported that flight bookings for January were 30% up on 2019 before the pandemic. Listeners who got in touch were worried about the impact on the environment. Lorna Dixon was one of them. She lives in Wiltshire and she says it's something she really cares a lot about.
Both my husband and myself, we're quite environmentally conscious. And I was curious to know if you could run a feature on green travel. We recently took a pledge not to fly, and we were inspired by what we'd read on a website called Flight Free UK of people's alternative holidays. And we decided for our holiday in Ireland that we would largely do it using public transport. So we went as foot passengers from Fishguard to Rosslare, bus services going out to the coast, and then we took the train up the east coast of Ireland to Dublin, and it was fabulous. What I'd really like to know more about is other ways in which, when I'm travelling, I can have a lighter impact on the environment. So I'd like to know more tips and advice on green travel.
Lorna Dixon, so here is what she wanted: advice and tips on green travel for people who want to go on holiday but do the least harm to the environment. Pippa Jacks can tell us what is happening across the travel sector. She's the editorial director of the Travel Trade Gazette. And Karen Simmons is the director of the travel agency Travel Matters. She's also the founder of Make Travel Matter campaign, and it encourages people to think about the impact of their holidays on the place that they're visiting. Good afternoon to both of you. Karen, Lorna Dixon wants some tips. So she and her husband have decided not to fly. If you're determined not to fly and you want to go abroad, what is the best way to do that?
Well, I'd like to raise a glass rather, and take my hat off to Lorna Dixon for wanting to not fly. I mean, there's definitely some popularity in that with the flight-free movement. But of course, we do need to fly to some destinations, because there's obviously not the transport infrastructure to get us to various different places around the globe. But we, obviously living on an island, we can obviously use like Eurostar to get over to the continent, taking ferries, and there's a brilliant infrastructure of trains when you are on the continent, and obviously all around the world. I was interested to read how the EU have created a cycle infrastructure all around the countries around Europe, which is work in progress, I guess. But there are obviously ways you can travel without getting on an aircraft, and I think it's great that Lorna is going to be using public transport because obviously there's plenty of places we can go by foot or by train or by bicycle, by ferry. And that's obviously going to have a significant part of keeping her carbon footprint down.
Let me ask Pippa Jacks. We had this huge response, as I said, to this item we did about air travel picking up again. You know, the travel industry cock a hoop about it. But a lot of people do feel very, very worried about the environment. Is that worry reflected in the kind of holidays that you can buy?
Yes, I'd say it's a small but growing market in terms of what you can buy now. It's always been possible to take a train through France and then take a ferry across to Corsica or to the Greek islands or whatever. But 5 or 10 years ago, that was quite tricky to do. It's quite complicated. And now what we've got are new companies specialising in that kind of no-fly holiday, and even more mainstream companies who are offering flight-free packages if you choose. So it's making it a lot easier to book that kind of holiday. You can go and talk to your local travel agent about it, and it will be a more seamless and more appealing package than it might have been previously. So I definitely think it's on the up, although the numbers are still small. There's this whole idea of slow travel as well. If you have the time, make the journey part of the experience.
Well, I was thinking that you might be able to do it.
Yeah,
you might be able to travel on the continent and even further afield by ferry and train and so on, but it would just take longer, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah. I mean, if you just want to get to Paris or Amsterdam, then actually going by train doesn't necessarily take longer from London specifically. But going further afield, it will take you longer, which isn't suitable for every traveller. But if you can make the time to do it, then stop off in some really unusual places. It would really add to the experience.
Karen, what about carbon offsetting then? Because you can pay, can't you, to offset the carbon that your flight generates if you do choose to fly. What is the best way to do that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You can offset the carbon, and more we're seeing airlines that are offering that as you go to purchase your flight seat. I would encourage people to consider flying more in economy, because the more plane seats there are on the aircraft, the aircraft's going to travel anyway, so you're taking up less space if you do go in economy. But I understand some people like to fly in business class, especially on those long-haul flights. Carbon offsetting, that's the most easiest way to do it, is when you're purchasing the flight seat. There are other carbon calculators that have offsetting that will go in towards tree planting, mangrove planting, that sort of thing. I would also say it's not just about offsetting, but perhaps to consider your carbon reduction. And that doesn't mean to say going flight free. You can be changing your behaviour and bringing your carbon reduction down in your whole lifestyle, right? So, yes, I think it's more about behaviour change and the sort of things that we can do as we journey on our holiday, and when we're actually in resort as well, how we can bring our carbon footprint down.
Pippa Jacks, is carbon offsetting big in the holiday market?
Yes, it's grown a lot. You'll see most airlines now, and lots of tour operators as well, might offer a voluntary offsetting scheme where you sort of, as Karen said, opt to pay a little bit extra to offset. I think the take-up of those voluntary offsetting schemes varies quite a lot. Some companies are including an offset themselves and just including it in the price that the customer pays. Unfortunately, carbon offsetting is a rather murky world. There's been lots of examples of offsetting schemes and tree planting projects which aren't doing what they promise they're going to do.
Yes, I was thinking that there's a lot of
trees in the wrong places.
Yeah, a lot of distrust.
For sure. So I think you need to make sure that the scheme has the gold standard or verified carbon standards accreditation to make sure it's a decent scheme. And be mindful that estimates say to offset flights to Tenerife, you might need to plant perhaps 40 trees was last time I looked it up. That's a lot of trees. So if a travel company is saying it's planting one tree on your behalf, that's obviously nowhere near to really offsetting the carbon impact of your flight. So as Karen says, offsetting is just one part of the solution. It's also about kind of reducing emissions more generally and not just spending a few extra pounds and thinking you've done your job.
Karen, I know that you also, one of your tips is to encourage people to think about their impact on the place that they visit. Tell us briefly, if you would, about that, because we're almost out of time.
Okay. Well, I would encourage people to have a look at the Make Travel Matter campaign, because that's got lots of tips and nudges how you can travel more responsibly, which will obviously lead to more sustainable travel. Tips could be to make sure that a lot of your money is within the local economy, so eating in the local restaurants, drinking local beer, buying souvenirs and handicrafts, using materials that are reusable. Bamboo cutlery, for example, no longer single-use plastics. What else?
That's as much as we've got time for. That was plenty to be going on with.
All right.
Thanks so much, Karen.